All right, so we're getting into our newer unit today. That's making predictions is the lesson that we're going to be learning, but our newest unit is going to be inferences. Quite a bit of what you've learned from probability is going to be utilized here in inferences, so they kind of go hand in hand. You guys have already done stuff with making predictions before. If given a probability of a situation, what would your expectations be if you performed something for a certain amount of trials? That's making predictions right there. So you kind of already have an idea of how to do this process. When we're making a prediction, we have to set up a proportion. So before, when we were doing probability, we set the proportion up as what was the probability ratio and set it equal to what we were making an expectation of or a prediction of. It's the same idea here, but instead of calling it probability, it's what did we see that happen, what was our observations, and what would we expect based off of our observations. It's kind of like experimental probability, okay? But before we get into the actual making predictions, let's talk a little bit about statistics itself, which is inferences. So statistics, you guys see statistics all the time. Every single day, you are seeing statistics, whether you realize it or not. Okay? Statistics is used to even use the projections that are created for the hurricane that's coming through right now. Okay, so how are we able to make that projected path? We're using inferences and data collection to be able to make all these different projections for which way it could go. Okay, anytime that you are watching a sport, okay, fantasy football, when you pick out your fantasy football teams, you pick out players based off of their stats. What's their performance? Okay, how likely are they to increase your odds of winning? So you're using that information and organizing that information to be able to make predictions and calculations. Okay, so you're collecting, organizing, and then interpreting data. Okay, so one of the things that we see it in every couple of years, we see it with politics. Okay, when we're taking polls on who we think the next candidate is going to be for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, who is possibly going to win the presidential nomination. And so you're seeing that information being collected so that they can make projections of ahead of time of who they think is going to be the winner, right? Something that you might not think very much about is the medical field. The medical field, how many of you want to go into a medical field? Raise your hand. Okay, so the medical field uses statistics every single day. Think about it. You guys benefit all the time from statistics in the medical field. How many of you have ever had to take headache medicine or cold medicine even? Every one of you has benefited then from statistics, because before that Tylenol was ever able to be produced, it had to go through what was called clinical trials. So somebody had to decide, hey, I think I can create something that will help alleviate the pain or the symptoms that occur from a headache or from a cold. But once I make this medicine, somebody's got to test it out. We've got to see, is it going to actually be a good medicine or not? Is it going to help the symptoms, or is it going to worsen them? So it goes into what's called clinical trials. Now, you might not think much about it with Tylenol, or it might not be that big a deal with a common cold, but in one area, my husband and I were both in the statistics background. Okay, he is actually a biostatistician. So he actually worked with medical statistics. So he used to work at a group called the Children's Oncology Group. Anybody know what oncology is? Okay, it's the study and research for cancer. So he used to work with kids who had very rare and very terminal cancers. So a lot of these kids would come through after they've been given horrible diagnosis and not such great odds of survival. They'd come to the children's oncology group where they would be able to be put into these clinical trials. So, you know, their parents and themselves have made the decision that they've got nothing to lose, right? So you might as well go ahead and see if this can help. And at least in the sense, it's helping to benefit science too. For maybe it might not help you, but it might help somebody who comes after you. So he used to work in that field. He wasn't a doctor. He was a statistician who he would go through and he would set up these trials where some of the kids would get the medicine and some of them would get a placebo. How many of you know what a placebo is? Brent? It's actually not a drug. It's basically a sugar pill. It's not a medical drug at all. So placebo is something that they give it to you so that you think that you might be getting the drug. You don't know. And again, it might sound really hard knowing that, well, why can't every single one of these kids get the medicine? Well, it's because they have to see it. Is this medicine working or is it not working? So some of them sign up knowing that they might not ever get the medicine at all. So placebo is a pill that or a drug that's not actually the medical drug. So it's just a baseline. It's like sugar. So they're given that so then they can see, okay, the kids who have had it, you know, and of course my husband looks at them, they're all just numbers for what he sees. But he looks through and goes, okay, these kids were given it compared to these kids who were given the placebo. Are they doing better than the placebo kids? Or are the side effects causing worse damage to them? You know, when these kids pass away, are they passing away because of the illness or are they passing away because of the side effects? So that's what he's looking through. And it was really tough for him, you know, because there was a lot of times, again, he knows that it's just a number to him, but he knows that there's a kid behind it. And that's difficult. And it was really sad sometimes when he would have to shut one of the clinical trials down because it just wasn't doing enough good. It was doing more harm than anything else. So it takes a lot of toll on you. But it is a very worthy job. It's definitely one that comes with a lot of stress, but it's something it's a great field. So if you're ever somebody who wants to go in the math field, this is definitely an area that, you know, I would strongly push you towards because it does have, it makes you feel like you're doing a lot of good. So when something actually gets pushed through. But he would look at all these trials and be able to work with the doctors and say, okay, hey, this is this drug that's been going on. There's been a lot of benefits. These are the side effects that seem to be occurring. It doesn't seem like it's having too much of an effect on them. And it's actually boosting their survival rate to 5 years or 6 years instead of the 5 months or 6 months that they maybe were given. So it's a very great field. But that's just one of the areas, again, that statistics can be involved in. Statistics is involved in sports. Statistics is involved even in school. We use statistics all the time. Looking at that board over there, that's statistics. We're collecting information about how you are performing in school. Are you being able to get to a certain standard? If you're not able to get to a certain standard, what can we do to be able to improve it more? So everything in life is about collecting information and interpreting it and using it to be able to better things. Okay, technology is all about statistics. Every aspect of life is about statistics. That's why nowadays, any career that you decide that you want to go into, you have to take at least 1 or 2 stat classes in college to be able to get through that career. It's a requirement now. Okay. All right. So let's get into some of the basic stuff. Some surveys. So when we're talking about surveying, and somebody wake Jimmy up, when we talk about surveys, we're talking about the method that's used for collecting information. Okay, if we talk about a population, population is basically the grand picture, right? The overall idea. It's an entire group that is a focus. The entire group that you want information about. Okay, so if I'm performing a survey about school food, then my entire population is going to be people at that school because that's the people who are affected by it. But you don't ever sit there and go through and survey every single person, because sometimes, especially in situations like when we're surveying for presidential information, political stuff, you don't survey every single person in the country because it would take too long, especially since you've got polls coming out every day. So you wouldn't sit here and be calling people up or taking surveys from people every single day. You take a sample, and that sample has to be a representation of the population. So again, if I'm wanting to talk about school food, that affects you guys, it affects you as students. Am I going to go down the street and survey people at a hospital? No, because they have nothing to do with what's relevant here. So you have to make sure that whatever you're surveying, who you survey, is a good representation of the people you want information about. So it's a small representation. Bless you. Of the population. And these are the ones who are actually going to be surveyed. So who's actually going to be surveyed? Again, not every single person in the school would be surveyed, but we would be able to take a portion of people at the school. So let's first discuss, who would be considered to be the population and who would we consider to be a sample. So if I wanted to talk about dress code and the changes that might be made with dress code, what group is this information going to be entailed to? Say it louder. Students, right? Students at the school. All students at the school would be considered to be the population of this group. So our population is going to be all students in school. All the students that are in the school. Now, a sample is just going to be a small representation of the students. But again, I want it to be a fair representation. I want it to be a fair representation. So maybe I might pick math students in first academics. Okay? Now tell me, does this look like a better pink to you guys? Is that easier to see that it's pink? Because I know you guys were complaining about my pinks previously, so I went out and bought a different type of pink. All right, so maybe I'm only going to survey students in a first academic math class. Okay, so that hits a lot of people still. Doesn't hit the whole school, but it at least gets quite a good portion of students. Okay, because just in 7th grade alone, there's 3 math classes that happen first academic. So right off the bat, we're not hitting every single 7th grader, but at least we're hitting, 90 to 100 students. Okay. What about construction? If we're constructing a highway in a small town, we're constructing a highway to go through a small town. Who thinks they can tell me what would the population be? What do you think, Emiliano? People who live in the town, right? Residents in the town. Anybody who lives there. Now, again, maybe it might be a small town, but you still aren't going to sit there and survey every single person about their thoughts. So you would just choose a sample of it. And your sample could be anywhere. Maybe you might go to people in the grocery store. So people entering the local grocery store. Is every single person in the town going to be going grocery shopping that day? No, but you're going to get a pretty good amount of people who are coming and going out of that grocery store. And it's a good mix. Like, I wouldn't want to sit here and say, well, I'm just going to survey people who are at a church, because then it limits you. It limits those that you are surveying. And it kind of tends, if you're focusing on one specific location that doesn't have a variety of people, then you're limiting your opinions that can be offered as well. It would be like me saying, okay, I want to get a good idea of, you know, who is a potential winner for the presidential nomination. So I'm just going to survey people in Georgia. Now, if I focus only on people in Georgia, what type of candidate do you think is most likely going to be voiced? Republican. But then if I go even deeper and I say, well, I'm just going to only survey people in Atlanta, then you're limiting it again, because even though Georgia is mainly Republican, Atlanta is mainly what? Democratic. Okay? So you have to make sure that you're giving yourself a good variety of who you would be surveying so that it's a fair representation. Like I said before, you have to be a representation of that population, meaning you have to take every opinion into thought. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and turn to page 23. So let's say that we have the following information here. We have a class, and this class has brought in pictures of where they were for summer vacation. So 19 students brought in a picture stating that they were at the beach. We have 14 students who brought in pictures of themselves at a theme park. 5 students brought in pictures of them going camping. And then 4 students had pictures of them just sitting at home. Okay, so again, like I said, inferences really plays hand in hand with probability. So what would be the probability of selecting a beach person? So selecting somebody who brought in a photo from the beach. So again, in order to be able to do that, you need to know first, you need to know how many people were what? Have pictures, right? How many total people have pictures? So you need to find out the total. How do we find out that total? Add them all together. So we're going to take the 19 plus the 14 plus the 5 plus the 4, and what is that going to come out to? 42. So we know that our total is out of 42. Now, how do we figure out for the numerator? If we're finding probability of a beach person, then the numerator is what? 19, because it's how many people wanted the beach, right? So you take how many people chose to bring in a picture of them at the beach, which was 19. So it's going to become 19 over 42. And that cannot be simplified, so that is our final answer right here. Now, based off of that, I want to predict how many students might have attended the beach in a school with 560 eighth graders. So of the 560 eighth graders, how many of those students might have gone to the beach? So again, what you're doing is you're taking that probability that you know. So we know that we've got a probability of 19 students out of 42. Okay, that's what we have observed. We've seen that happening. But we want to know how many of them out of 560. So again, once we've got this set up, all we have to do is perform the cross product. So we're going to multiply 42 times x, and that'll give us 42x. And then we're going to multiply 19 times 560, and that's going to give us 10,640. And then from there, to solve for x, we're just going to go ahead and divide by 42. And that would tell us roughly how many students. So now when we divide it, are we going to get a perfect value? No, we're going to get a decimal, but we're talking about people. So can we leave it as a decimal? No, we have to round our answer. So it's going to become an approximation. So you need to make sure that you round appropriately. Remember, 4 and below, you let it go. 5 and above, you give it a shove. So what would it be? Brent? Very good. 253. So we can expect or predict that approximately 253 students in the 8th grade might have attended the beach. Okay, let's say that we've got a survey. Oops, sorry. A survey found that 85% of young people no longer use Facebook. Okay, so 85% of young people no longer use Facebook. They use Snapchat and Twitter and Instagram and everything else instead. So what we want to do is we're going to predict how many of the 2,450 students at Peachtree Ridge do use Facebook. So survey found that 85% of young people no longer use Facebook. We're going to predict how many of the 2,450 students at Peachtree Ridge do use Facebook. I want you guys to do that one on your own. All right, who can tell me how many people would they expect to use Facebook still? Jimmy? 368. Very good. So the question was saying that they gave information about how many people no longer use it, but we want to focus on how many do use it. So if 85% of people no longer use it, then what percent still do? Say it louder. 15, right? If you take 100 minus 85, that'll give you 15%. So we're focusing on, still using Facebook. So those people who still use Facebook would be 15. And since it's a percent, and I need to make it into a ratio, what do I put it out of? Percent is always out of how much? 100. So it's 15% out of 100, right? Still using Facebook would be 15 out of 100. Now, I want to figure out how many out of 2,450. So I set that up and then do my cross product. So I'm going to do 100 times x, which is going to give me 100x. God bless. God bless. Then we're going to do the 15 times 2,450, and that's going to give us 36,750. But then when we divide by 100, again, because you're going to have to round, when you divide by 100, you're going to get that x is equal to 367.5, but you're talking about people, so you have to estimate it. So x is approximately 368 people. Make sure you're careful, because I'm sure some of you probably got your answer to be 2,083 because you found it for how many do not use Facebook anymore. Got to make sure you read very carefully with those words. Okay, we want to know how many still do use Facebook when we're given how many did not. All right, any questions? Fantastic. So you're going to have your assignment tonight. It is several pages, several worksheets, one worksheet and one from the workbook that you're going to be doing. I wanted to make sure you had enough to help